The day my mother-in-law called the HR department at my office and told them I had been falsifying expense reports. I was sitting in a Tim Hortons parking lot eating a breakfast sandwich alone, because I had nowhere else to go during my lunch break. I didn't find out until my manager Carol pulled me into the small glass-walled room beside the photocopier and closed the blinds. She looked genuinely sorry, which made it worse. She said someone had called, a woman, and made a formal complaint. She said HR had to take it seriously. She said she was so sorry. I drove home that afternoon knowing I would walk into a house that didn't feel like mine anymore. I want to tell you something honestly, because I think a lot of people who hear stories like mine always wonder the same thing. Why didn't you leave sooner? I asked myself that every single day for 11 years. And the truest answer I ever found was this. When you are inside it, you cannot see the shape of it. You only feel it, one small humiliation at a time, until the humiliations become so ordinary you stop noticing them the way you stop noticing a noise that never goes away. I met my husband at a company barbecue in Mississauga. I was 29. He was funny and easy to talk to, and he laughed at the right moments, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. His name was Colin. He worked in project management. He had a good handshake and a nice car, and a mother who called him every single night at 9 o'clock. I should have paid more attention to that last part. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at a vineyard in Niagara-on-the-Lake. My maid of honor gave a toast that made everyone cry. My father danced badly, and I loved him for it. For about 6 months after the wedding, life felt exactly the way I had hoped it would. And then his mother, Rosemary, decided to move to Brampton. She had been living in New Brunswick with Colin's aunt. Then the aunt passed, and suddenly there was nothing keeping Rosemary there, and Colin said it only made sense for her to be closer to family. He said it before asking me. He said it at dinner casually, the way you mentioned that you're almost out of milk. His mother was coming. That was that. She arrived in October with 7 boxes, a ceramic rooster she placed on my kitchen counter without asking, and opinions about everything. She had opinions about how I loaded the dishwasher. She had opinions about the thread count of our sheets. She had opinions about the way I said hello when I answered the phone, which she told me was too abrupt and made me sound unfriendly. Within 3 weeks, she had rearranged the pantry. Within 2 months, she had taken over the grocery shopping because, as she told Colin within earshot of me, I didn't know how to buy produce. Colin found all of this perfectly normal. He had grown up with her. He couldn't see it. Or he could see it and he didn't care, which is a different thing, and worse. I worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized logistics company. I had a good salary, a small team that I liked, and a performance review history that I was genuinely proud of. I was good at my job. I had always been good at my job. It was the one place in my adult life where I felt completely competent and fully myself. I started staying later at the office, not because there was more work, though I told myself that, but because coming home meant navigating whatever mood Rosemary was in, whatever comment she would make over dinner, whatever pointed silence would follow if I disagreed with her about anything at all. Colin never said anything. When I brought it up, he would look tired and say, "She doesn't mean it that way," or "You're being sensitive," or occasionally, "Nothing at all," which was its own kind of answer. His sister, Fiona, was not much better. She lived 40 minutes away in Oakville and visited every other weekend. She was the kind of person who delivered cruelty in a bright, cheerful voice, so that if you ever reacted to it, you looked like the unreasonable one. She told me once, smiling, that it must be hard for Colin being married to someone so focused on her career. She said it in front of 3 other people at a birthday dinner. I smiled back and excused myself to go to the bathroom and stood at the sink for a long time looking at my own face. The thing about emotional erosion is that it doesn't happen all at once. It happens the way water shapes a stone. You don't watch it happen. You just notice, one day, that the stone is different, that you are different, that you apologize now before you've even done anything wrong, that you check your husband's expression before you speak, that you have stopped telling your friends about your home life because you are tired of their concerned faces, and you are tired of not knowing how to explain something that, from the outside, probably sounds manageable. Year 4, Rosemary went through my mail, not accidentally. She opened a letter from my bank that had my name on it and left it on the kitchen table with a note asking why I had a separate account. Colin's response when I told him was to ask why I needed a separate account. Year 7, Fiona told their cousin that I had never really fit into the family, and that Colin deserved someone warmer. I heard this secondhand from Colin's cousin's wife, who told me with the guilty look of someone who knows they are delivering something terrible but cannot help themselves. Year 9, I tried to tell Colin that I was unhappy. I sat down at the kitchen table on Sunday morning when Rosemary was at church and I said very quietly, that I needed things to change. I said I felt invisible in my own home. I said I loved him, but I was drowning. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "I think you need to talk to someone, a therapist or something, because I don't know what more I can do." I started seeing a therapist 3 weeks later. Her name was Janet. She had an office on King Street with a plant on the windowsill and a box of tissues on the table beside the couch. She was the first person in years who asked me how I was and actually waited for the answer. It took about 8 months of weekly sessions before I could say out loud to another human being that I thought I needed to leave. And even then I said it so quietly that Janet leaned forward slightly, like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. I said, "I need to leave." "Okay," she said. "Let's talk about what that looks like." Here is the thing about leaving a marriage when you share finances, a home, and 11 years of a life built together. You cannot do it impulsively, especially when you have come to understand that the person you're leaving has a mother who goes through your mail and a sister who watches you the way a hawk watches something small moving in a field. I didn't tell anyone. Not my sister. Not my closest friend, Bev, who had known me since university and would have driven to Brampton immediately with wine and moving boxes if I'd asked. Not even Janet, not all of it, not right away. What I did was this. I started paying attention. I had always managed our household finances. Colin handled his own money, his RRSP, his work benefits, but the joint account, the mortgage, the monthly expenses, all of that had been mine to manage from the beginning because he had no interest in it and I was, professionally speaking, better at it. This had always been framed subtly as a flaw of mine. Too controlling, too organized, too much. I started by understanding exactly what we had. The house had been purchased for $680,000 6 years ago. Based on current market conditions, I estimated it was worth somewhere between $910,000 and $940,000. There was $287,000 remaining on the mortgage. That left roughly $620,000 in equity split between us. Under Ontario's Family Law Act, matrimonial homes equity is divided equally on separation. My share would be close to $310,000. I also had a TFSA I had been quietly contributing to for years, my own RRSP, and a non-registered investment account that I had opened with an inheritance from my grandmother when I was 32. All of it was in my name. All of it was legally mine. I made an appointment with a family lawyer without telling anyone. Her office was downtown Toronto, far enough from home that I felt safe. She was direct and clear, and she explained to me exactly what my rights were under Ontario law. She told me what to document. She told me what to keep copies of. She told me that the most important thing was not to act until I was ready, and that when I was ready, I should be very, very ready. I started keeping notes, dates, incidents, things said. The time Rosemary opened my mail, the things Fiona had said at dinner, the conversation where Colin told me I needed a therapist. Every conversation where I said I was unhappy and he turned it back on me. I kept the document saved on a cloud drive that had no connection to any of our shared accounts or devices. I also opened a new personal hedging account at a different bank, separate from everything. I had my salary direct deposited there for the 3 months before I left. I told HR it was a banking change. Nobody questioned it. Then Rosemary called my workplace. I don't know what exactly she told HR. What I know is that my manager called me into that glass-walled room and told me that a complaint had been made, that someone had claimed I was misappropriating company expense accounts. She said it was being investigated. She said I should take a few days. I sat in my car in the parking lot on King Street for 45 minutes. I wasn't crying. I was past crying about things like this. I was thinking, with a terrible focused clarity, that I had been patient for 11 years and that patience had not made anything better, and that it was time to stop waiting for things to change on their own. I drove home. Rosemary was in the kitchen. She didn't ask how work was. I went upstairs, closed the bedroom door, called my lawyer, and told her I was ready. My lawyer filed the separation paperwork on a Thursday. She had advised me to be prepared for the possibility that Colin, once served, might try to move money or create financial complications. We had prepared for this. The joint account had only what was needed for the mortgage pre-authorized payment. My salary was already rerouted. The documentation I had been building for months was organized and complete. I had also, with my lawyer's guidance, retained a real estate agent I trusted to begin the process of listing the house. Under Ontario law, both spouses must consent to sell the matrimonial home. But I was not trying to sell it without him. I was preparing to demonstrate to a mediator that the house needed to be sold as part of the division of assets. My lawyer told me this was a strong position. The house was the largest shared asset. A forced sale was a real possibility if he refused to cooperate. He refused to cooperate. Specifically, he called me from work the afternoon he was served and said, very slowly and carefully, that I was making a mistake. that his mother had only been trying to help, that I had never understood their family, that I was being vindictive. He said the house wasn't going anywhere. I said I would let my lawyer handle things from here. He said something else. Something about how I had always been like this, cold and calculating and difficult. I had heard versions of this for 11 years. I wrote the time and date in my document and hung up. Fiona called me 20 minutes later. She didn't bother with the cheerful voice this time. She told me I was destroying the family. She told me I had always been an outsider. She said something that I won't repeat here because some things, once said, belong only in the past. I blocked her number. I moved out on a Saturday in March. My sister had no idea until I called her from the parking lot of a Marriott in Etobicoke and asked if I could stay with her for a few weeks. There was a very long silence. Then she said, "I'm on my way." She arrived with her husband and her 12-year-old, who carried one of my boxes up the stairs without being asked and didn't make a fuss about it, which made me love him in a way I hadn't expected. The HR investigation at my workplace concluded within 3 weeks. My manager told me that the complaint had been found to be without merit. She said the records were clear, that nothing in my expense history showed any irregularity whatsoever. She said she was sorry for how it had been handled and asked if I was all right. I said I was getting there. The mediation process took 4 months. Colin contested everything at first. He contested the house valuation. He contested the timeline of separation. He brought Fiona to one session as, I'm not even sure what she was supposed to be, emotional support, a character witness, something. And my lawyer had the mediator ask her to leave. In the end, he didn't have a strong position. The equity in the house was clear. My own assets were clearly mine. His financial records were straightforward. There was no hidden wealth, no significant complications. What he had was stubbornness and a mother who was still, from what I understood, making calls on his behalf that went nowhere. The house sold in May. In the kind of market we'd had in the GTA, it went over asking. My portion of the proceeds, combined with my legal share of our other joint assets, came to just over $330,000. I had, in my own accounts, another $140,000 in savings and investments. I was 41 years old, and I had almost $500,000, and no one telling me how to load a dishwasher. I cried in my car, in the parking lot of a Loblaws in Etobicoke for about 20 minutes. Not because I was sad, exactly. I think it was something closer to relief so large it had to come out somewhere. I had already been looking at apartments in Ottawa. My company had an office there. I had spoken, carefully and quietly, with my regional director about a possible transfer, and she had been more enthusiastic than I expected. She said there was a senior position opening. She said she'd always thought I was underutilized where I was. I signed the lease on my Ottawa apartment in June. 1 bedroom, a small balcony, a building with a good elevator and a superintendent who answered messages within the hour. It was the first place I had ever chosen entirely on my own, for myself, with no one else's opinion in the room. The week I moved in, I drove to a hardware store and bought a small plant for the windowsill. Nothing expensive, just something living in mine. Bev drove out from Toronto the first weekend to help me unpack. We stayed up too late drinking wine on the balcony, and she asked me, around midnight, how I really was. I thought about it honestly for a moment. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 11 years, I said, and I just exhaled. She raised her glass. I raised mine. I have heard through a mutual connection that Rosemary is now living full-time with Colin in what used to be our house, except it isn't our house anymore. It was sold. He had to rent an apartment in Mississauga. I don't know the details, and I have found, to my mild surprise, that I have very little interest in the details. What I know is this. My name is not in any shared account with anyone. My expenses are my own. My kitchen is exactly the way I like it. My mail is mine. When I come home in the evening, the apartment is quiet in the specific way that a place is quiet when it belongs entirely to you. The HR complaint that Rosemary filed is still on record. My clean record is also on record. My new regional director has already told me that if the senior position comes through, she will be recommending me for the role. I made my first RRSP contribution from my Ottawa account in July. I set up automatic transfers. I opened a new TFSA. I made a budget, a real one, on a spreadsheet, the way I used to make them before someone spent years telling me that being good with money was a personality flaw. I had dinner last week with a woman from my new office named Sandra. She's funny and slightly chaotic about her lunch orders, and she has very strong opinions about the best pho in the Byward Market area. We made plans to go try it next Thursday. I told her a little about where I came from. Not everything, just enough. She looked at me and said, "Wow, you seem really okay." I thought about that on the drive home. Through downtown Ottawa, past the canal, lights on the water. I think I actually am.